My name is Jesus Daniel Arce, and I am an art history major at UC Riverside. I will be discussing 4 stereographs that I chose for my subtheme. All of these stereographs have a similar subject that relates to my subtheme of assimilation. Every time I think of assimilation, I think of my parents and my family members who immigrated from Mexico to the United States. They had to learn a new language and culture in order to fit into this country. I grew up with a mixture of both Mexican and American cultures, and it made me feel like a foreigner in this country and a foreigner in my parents' country. I understand the struggle of trying to assimilate to one culture, but still not being enough for that culture, and the need to be part of something bigger. We see that theme in some of these stereographs in the sense that they want to be part of the majority instead of the minority. In the first stereograph titled An Indian Family, we see 5 individuals of various age and 2 dogs. They are depicted as a family enjoying their photo being taken. We don't know a lot about this family since we only get the title of the stereograph and the depiction of the stereograph is the same as the title. We don't know the relationship of each of these people, but we do know that they are wearing Western style clothing of the era that the stereograph was taking. From the little information that we have on this stereograph, we see that it's a family trying to fit into the American culture and the idea of a family. In the second stereograph titled Edison and His Family, we see 5 individuals of various ages. Some of them are on the bench and some of them are standing behind them. We see that this stereograph is set up in a more professional setting. We know who these individuals are based on the title. We know that it's one of Edison's wives and their 3 children. This is what an immigrant family should look like when they're trying to look more of a typical American family. He is a prominent figure in American history, and trying to replicate what he and his family look like would make immigrants and people who are trying to assimilate feel closer to the ideal American family. In the third stereograph titled A Cuban Family, we have 5 individuals giving their attention to a single individual that is seen sitting on the ground. 3 of these individuals seem to be more well-dressed than the other 3, making me believe that these individuals might not be part of the same family. We, however, still see the act of assimilation taking place within the stereograph. We see that the individuals that are well dressed have more of a Western style of clothing, which is associated with the wealthy class, while the other individuals that look dressed down aren't wearing clothes that you would see in a catalog or magazine of American people. In the fourth and final stereograph titled Senator Robert Taft and Family, we see 6 individuals arranged in a specific manner. This stereograph, similar to the second one of Edison and his family, it features a prominent figure known to the American public. We are given the parental figure's name, and we know that the other individuals are his family members. They're what an American family is supposed to look like. This is what every family should assimilate into. They are basically the standard. Having a peek into their home also guides people into assimilating their homes into an American household. I chose these stereographs because I wanted there to be a comparison and contrast between 2 American families and 2 non-white assimilated families. I wanted people to understand that assimilation itself is a form of colonization. These individuals and their families lose a part of their original culture to fit into the ideal American family. Some unknowingly assimilate into the Western culture, while others knowingly assimilate in order to fit into the more ideal society and culture. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I am Tran Lee Nguyen. I am a senior at the University of California, Riverside. I am currently majoring in art history and administrative studies with a concentration in marketing. It is such a great honor to participate in the Armchair Colonialism Curating Project. I will be presenting a stereograph that speaks the most to me throughout the process of learning about the core issues with the Western gaze. The stereograph here is named Devilish Wheels, People's Amusement, Cairo, Egypt. The stereographs capture people with an Egyptian Ferris wheel, which seems normal for any ethnic on Earth to innovate their own entertainment. There is also a man in the middle ground appear to be dancing, overall an exciting atmosphere. However, the name of the stereograph suggests the company that publishes the Stereograph did not think so. This harmless, fun event that the Egyptian people is participating in the lens of Western culture is devilish and barbaric to the inexperienced and uneducated consumers who will eventually buy these stereographs with these labels. They will also be buying the narrative that people from other countries gather to do uncivilized things. And with a society that feel contempt for differences, these different people who has different facial features, clothing, and gesture could suggest that they are uncivilized and barbaric to the Western gaze. With the stereograph, I intended to weight the definition of level of civilization, pointing out the cultural shaming that Western societies tend to weigh upon other societies. As society becomes more aware of and respect all culture around the world, looking back at these stereographs help remind us that the expression of the art and visual culture also records how societal constructs that affected people. I'm very honored to be included in this project and hope to deliver this stereograph. Hopefully, we can all aware of the past and achieve inclusion. Thank you for your time.
Hello, my name is Desiree Marmolejo. I am a sociology major and a double major in art history at UC Riverside. The four images I chose for this exhibit was a hula dancer, a portrait of Mark Twain's daughter Clara, a Native Hawaiian gentleman, and Burton Holmes. I chose these four images due to the lack of a name given to us in the back of the images of the two Native Hawaiians. We don't know their names. We don't know if that's what their occupation is or if being a hula dancer is their real occupation. There's not much information shared with us about them. And I thought it was important to point that out, especially with our colonial armchair and knowing how significant it is to how significant our names are to our identity. And it's clearly obvious with the image of Mark Twain's daughter and Burton Holmes that these two individuals are someone of significance, that their names are given to us in the title. And I wanted to point that out because the hula dancer, we don't know her name. We don't know if even being a hula dancer is her actual occupation or if this image was just taken for tourist reasons. We don't know who the Native Hawaiian gentleman is. This erasure of their name very much fits into the colonial armchair idea and erasure of the names that we see a lot in colonial history.
Hello everyone, my name is Michael Aguirre and I'm currently a student at the University of California, Riverside, majoring in art history. Today I came here to talk about Professor Laxton's Armchair Colonialism course, as us juniors and seniors were dealt the task of curating stereographs for the California Museum of Photography here in Riverside. The topic I chose to write about was colonialism and evangelization, as evangelizing was a very critical aspect in colonial times. Stereographs were used to educate public schools, or they were sold for private use, as they were deemed armchair traveling as they took you away to another place. The first image I chose was the traditional Garden of Eden, east of the Euphrates Valley, 250 miles northwest of Babylon, as it was a very critical story within the Bible. The second image I chose was the mountain where Moses was received the Ten Commandments over the plain of the assembly on top of Mount Sinai, which was another critical story within the Bible. The third image I chose was the baptizing in the Jordan, Palestine, where the disciple John was known to baptize new believers and spread the word of God. The fourth image I chose was the tomb with the stone rolled away, the tomb of the King, Lord Jesus, in Jerusalem, Palestine, as it concluded the story of Jesus Christ as he ascended into heaven shortly after. I chose these images because Underwood and Underwood did a very good job of displaying these images in chronological order, while also selling different knowledges that people didn't know about within the time. I enjoyed these images and I hope you guys did too. So have a nice day, everyone.
Hello everyone, thank you all for being here. My name is Mara Leon. I'm a fourth year student majoring in art history, minoring in history. As a part of our theme, armchair colonialism, I'll be briefly talking about one of my 4 stereographs featured in our curated exhibit, my focus being on anthropological exhibits at the World's Fair. The image I chose is titled A Samoan Maiden Midway Plaisance, Rural Columbian Exposition, Chicago. It was taken in 1893 at the Chicago World's Fair, also known as the Columbian Exposition, or the White City. This fair was meant to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Columbus' arrival in the Americas. It was designed to show up the United States as a rising global power. It was full of grand buildings, new technologies, and messages about progress. But beneath that polished surface was something much darker. At the midway, there were so-called ethnographic villages, displays where real people from colonized countries were put on view for white American audiences. These were called human zoos, where people were observed like exhibits, meant to entertain and educate visitors on racial and cultural differences. The stereograph I'm presenting would be paired with a stereoscope, which would create a 3D effect. That visual realism made the experience feel more lifelike, almost as if you're standing right there. Companies like Underwood and Underwood and the Keystone View Company sold these images to white middle-class households as a way to see the world from the comfort of their own living rooms, but what they were really doing was promoting a deep colonial and racist way of looking, turning real human lives into stage-controlled spectacles. In the stereograph shown, we see a Samoan woman, standing in traditional dress. She appears posed, possibly against her wishes. Her face is slightly turned away from the camera, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. Her expression is hard to read, but her body language suggests discomfort or unease. Behind her is a makeshift hut, meant to show authenticity, though it's part of an artificial display design to fit Western ideas of what native life looked like. This image is a clear example of how photography, especially in the form of stereographs, was used to shape narratives of empire. It turned people into objects of study, stripping away context and individuality in favor of a spectacle. These images reinforce ideas about race, gender, and civilization that were essential to how America imagined itself and justified its role in the world. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Merrow. I'm an art history major at UC Riverside, and the stereograph I'm discussing today shows the North Pacific Railroad Station in Gardner, Montana. While many of us imagine colonialism as the action inflicted on the human being, we forget to think about the land we inhabit. So with this image, I'm looking at the colonization of land. It's important to understand that we acknowledge we live on stolen land and have used machinery and people for the sake of making it ours. Here we have a Northern Pacific Railroad steam engine coming into a station in Gardner, Montana, which is near Yellowstone. When looking at it, we can see the figure walking towards us in the foreground, holding a pickaxe, possibly working on something outside of the frame or on his way to work. And when we look behind him, we see this grand steam engine with steam wafting away from it. And that gives the image a sense of movement, with the direction of the wind taking the steam and the man mid-step. However, when we look around, there's nothing but this train station to be seen. It's barren, mostly free of the settler's mark. But that emptiness is seen as potential to the colonizer, ready to become a town. We've become the settler and created a settler's gaze through this image.
Hello, my name is Elena Yang, and I am an art history major at UCR. The stereograph I am discussing is Kitchen of a Native Home in the Philippine Islands. This image is one of the many images that were not chosen in the final selection for my theme of interior spaces of homes and armchair travel. From the 1840s to the 1930s, stereographs became a popular staple in the homes of many middle-class Americans. They serve as a form of armchair travel, a means of experiencing the world without the need to leave one's home. In the image are 2 figures with their backs facing us. They are sitting on a straw-like platform, held up by logs with a straw roof, and are presumably making a meal. It is a very open space, with a circular straw covering half of the hollow space in front of the figures. At face value, the stereograph could be looked at and analyzed through an anthropological lens, that this mundane scene is just to show the American and Western audience how other cultures, like Filipinos, go about in their everyday lives, like making a simple meal or the appearance of their homes, and how the space of home differs from a typical Western middle class home. However, through the course of my research, I learned that stereographs have many forms of being looked at and holds a different meaning than what it appears to show us. There is a sense of a one-sided narrative from both the subject and the image and the viewers. As the backs of the figures are towards us, there is an unseen narrative of the subjects that we are unaware of, and we, the viewers, place this colonial narrative of this native kitchen as underdeveloped, boosting our national pride of being a better nation because their living conditions appear to remain in a primitive state while we Westerners are developing.
My name is Sandra Martis, and I'm an art history major at UC Riverside. The stereograph I'm discussing is untitled, but the description on the back reads, "Indians from 4 tribes live peacefully in the Indian village. This view is from the balcony of the Hopi house and shows several Hopis in full costume. The Maya temple is shown in the background." I want to provide a quick summary of why I consider this stereograph exemplary of my theme. The overarching theme of our exhibit is armchair colonialism, the idea that stereographs contributed to colonialism in a more conspicuous manner, as they allowed everyday people to participate in colonial ideologies without ever leaving their homes. Essentially, Western, middle class, and often white individuals initially used stereographs as a form of entertainment. Later, stereographs were rebranded as an educational tool that simplified the act of learning to the act of looking. Individuals no longer had to travel to other places or even leave their living room to know the world. They just had to look. In researching how stereographs were marketed at the time, I found this concept was the explicit selling point for stereograph companies. One of the issues that arises when researching individual stereographs is the context. Many stereographs contain little to no context of the image, and if they do, the text is often skewed to a Western perspective of the imagery. This is why, under the overarching theme of armchair colonialism, I intend for my theme to tackle the ideology behind the company Underwood and Underwood's slogan, "To see is to know." I argue, to see is to interpret. My chosen stereograph confronts this idea in relation to the commodification of indigenous aesthetics. The stereograph has no title, and without reading the description on the back, the viewer is only left with their interpretation of the scene. Now, if you were to critically read the description on the back, you may be left with more questions than answers. It is a fabrication of indigenous existence, marketed to entice Western audiences. The Maya temple, existing in the background alongside Hopi natives in the foreground, is an explicit display of provable contradictions, suggesting this scene is manufactured. So you can't always trust what you see with stereographs. There also is no indication on this stereograph that it's from the World's Fair, titled Century of Progress, in 1933. A fair with the motto, "Science finds, industry applies, man conforms." This is how my chosen stereograph illustrates the commodification of indigenous aesthetics to the everyday people who were looking at them, interpreting them, and confusing the act of looking with the act of knowing.
My name is Martina Carson, and I am an art history major at UC Riverside. Before we begin, I wanted to state that I chose my image with the theme of isolation brought on by imperialism and westernization in mind. I felt that specific images being taken of different groups participating in their culture were being framed in a way that exoticized them and detached them from the modern world. There seemed to be a deliberate separation between the modernized Western world and the communities who were continuing their cultural practices while being colonies to empires. The image we will be looking at is untitled, taken in 1933 by the Holly C. White Keystone View Company, depicting hula dancers in Hawaii. After becoming a colony of the U.S., there was an effort to entice the public to visit and observe the exotic culture that was being participated in Hawaii. I am sure we all have a set of associations that come to mind when we think of Hawaii. Even without visiting, we have a mental image of what to expect from the place. For example, hula dancing is often portrayed in media and images as a form of entertainment, something to watch for enjoyment. Looking into the history behind hula, we find that it was done as a religious ceremony with the intent of connecting to the spiritual world, gods, and ancestors, as well as a way of passing down stories through their culture. In this image, we can see hula dancers performing on a stage for an audience of seemingly non-Hawaiian tourists, and the perspective of the shot makes the viewer feel as if we are also in the crowd watching the performance. There is a certain feeling of detachment between performer and audience, as is usually the case in entertainment shows. But with hula dancing, we might find that it loses a sense of unity and spiritual connection that hula is meant to convey or inspire. In this case, hula was used as a way of enticing foreign tourists to come visit and observe the difference in culture. Because hula was becoming a vehicle for drawing tourists, it began to change shape to become more palatable for tourist audiences. Hula dancers themselves also started to gain an alternate fabricated identity of a somewhat scantily clad, enticing exotic woman that welcomed tourists with a smile and a lei. Overall, creating an alluring image of an open, comfortable place with a culture different enough to interest, but not so different that it isolated the settlers, at the cost of isolating and changing the culture of the native people.
Hello there. My name is Franco Maia, and I'm a art history, and Spanish major at the University of California, Riverside. The artwork I will be discussing for today is St. Peter's and the Vatican, greatest of churches and the greatest of places, Rome, Italy. Now, this image was made in 1931. In theory, the image itself is quite simple. It's an image looking through the window at St. Peter's with the dome visible. But note the name of the image, the greatest of all churches and the greatest places, and compare that to other architectural stenograph image titles of foreign nations, such as the Taj Mahal, Agra, India, which is a far plainer title for such a grand architectural masterpiece. The colonial perspective is far easier to identify in images of people than those of architecture because they are far less ambiguous. Yet it is still present in these images in subtle ways, the difference in names being one such example. In the world of Catholicism and to Christianity as a whole, the Vatican is one of the most important places as it is the home of the Pope. But it interests me that pretty much no other location holds a title similar to this in the stenographs that have been curated. Another example is the back of the stenograph cards. Now the back for the Vatican image has no information. Simply the name of the Vatican. The Taj Mahal, on the other hand, has a long caption on the back that makes the Taj Mahal seem like something from the past rather than a current cultural icon. Unlike how the Vatican is depicted. Not only that, but some of the information of the Taj Mahal's history is blatantly wrong, such as the dates the Mughal Empire ruled. The stenograph says the Mughals ruled India from 1525 to 1707. And while 1707 was the beginning of the swift decline of Mughal rule in India, it would not be until the Indian Rebellion of 1857 when the Mughals would completely lose control in India.
Hello, I'm Chloe Kim. I am a fourth-year art history student at the University of California, Riverside. Today, I will be discussing an untitled image published by the HC&Y Company of the Postigo prison in Manila in the Philippine Islands. Its date is untitled, however, it depicts prisoners from the Philippine-American War around the periods 1899 to 1902. This photograph is in a set of 4 images I have curated for the exhibition here at the California Museum of Photography depicting armchair colonialism. I've chosen this image to discuss because when we think of war and the violent consequences, the act of colonial conquest, we seek images with action, with a direct story. The image we see here today is calm, however, focused on the imprisonment of Filipino citizens. What we see here is the aftermath of violence and the formation of institutionalized oppression in media, society, and art. Photography, as scholar John Berger explains, is used as a spectacle for the masses and an object of surveillance. We can feel the spectacle here, quite intensely, with the bountiful eyes directed at the audience. Emotions of uneasiness and anxiety can be traced in the photographer's use of lighting, as those in prison seem to fade into the dark. Without the text, the proximity of the photograph could lead the viewer to question if they themselves are the prisoners, depth being used here to enhance the optical illusion that one is in immediate danger. The act of incarceration in the media is ever present, making visual analysis and interpretation of imagery that much more imperative. Colonialism's grasp is still strong today, and this exhibition hopes to highlight the voices of those who are pictured in a supposed silence. These are not images lost in time, however, cultural histories and stories re-return to those affected by repressive apparatuses still enacted today.
Hello everyone, my name is River Ferronda and I am an art history major at UC Riverside. What I've chosen to talk about in this video is a stereograph titled Abagabo Family, Philippine Concession, Jamestown Exposition, Virginia. It is a 7.18 inch by 4.18 inch keystone photo print from Underwood & Underwood that depicts an indigenous Filipino family at the Philippine Concession in Jamestown, Virginia. In researching the specific stereograph and aspects of it, I discovered that the Philippine Concession is an exhibition that was part of the 1907 Jamestown Exposition, which was created in order to celebrate the first successful colony in the U.S. It was meant to showcase various cultures that existed throughout the Philippines, as the exhibition name suggests. One could assume that the exposition organizers and the U.S. government wanted to display the Philippines to the public as a show of its status as a territory, or more accurately, a colony of the United States. Around the time of the concession, it had been 9 years since the U.S. took control of the Philippines. What initially drew me in about this image is that it, as the title states, shows a Filipino family, and I'm a Filipino person myself, although not from an indigenous group. The clothes that they wore also a point of interest for me. For those that aren't aware, stereographs were a visual form of entertainment that was popular in the West from the 19th century to the early 20th century. They're images of the same thing taken from two slightly different angles and placed side by side. Oftentimes, what was captured in them were images of foreign, quote-unquote, lands and cultures. This sounds neat upon first glance, but when examining the stereographs beyond their visuals, reading the title or the associated text, you'll quickly find out that the images are less than savory. It is an unfortunate truth that many stereographs are accompanied with information that serves to promote a certain view of what it is depicting, whether that be on purpose or accidental. This means that many of the stereographs that show non-European and indigenous cultures are often meant to be viewed in a negative light. The purposes of the Bagabo family image are, unfortunately, possibly derogatory, and it hits home because I've grown up being viewed in a similar way for the same reason. Beyond that, it is a fascinating image as it tells you more about Western culture during this time of the image's publishing, as well as how they viewed other parts of the world. The image shows a family consisting of two parents and a child, all of which are wearing the traditional clothes of their specific group. Something else to think about is that the image isn't just of people in the Philippines, it's specifically an indigenous Filipino family in a Virginia exhibition. The family, presumably, is there because they're meant to be shown off as a point of cultural interest, with the audience comparing their current livelihood to that of the people they're viewing. The audience for the exhibition is meant to be white Americans that could presumably afford to be at the exposition, if it was an event that wasn't free to the public, of course. Overall, the stereograph is meant to show white Americans that their culture and lives are inherently better than the culture and lives of the quote-unquote savage indigenous Filipinos. Thank you for listening.
Hello. My name is Olivia Vigil, and I'm a third-year art history major at the University of California, Riverside. Today, I will be discussing the stereograph titled Snake Chief. This image was taken in Utah, North and Central America. Its publishers are A.J. Russell and Stone, and the date is not indicated for this specific stereograph. The relevance of this image towards armchair colonialism represents the racial dominance on indigenous culture in America. Viewers' attention is directed towards the 5 male figures presented shoulder to shoulder wearing mixed traditional and westernized attire. Audience can see a teepee behind the men, along with an empty valley background. The overall purpose of this image was to represent these men's cultural displacement in modern society by their mixed cultural attire to direct the narrative of Western colonization. Clearly, this image is being staged, and these men are being posed, having no control over how they wanted to be represented as a group culturally. This type of image only added to the stereotypical ideals that impacted indigenous groups in modern-day society on how they were supposed to be perceived by placing intentional props to add to the stereotypical narrative of what an Indian should look like. This image, in a sense, freezes indigenous culture in the past, since these men are being displayed with a teepee behind them in an empty valley rather than in a city or home. Although these men are in westernized attire, they are still perceived as outsiders due to their culture as a group. While white middle-class audience had seen this specific image as educational or for entertainment purposes, indigenous people understood that they had no part or say on how to actually represent their culture. Thank you.